Hello and welcome to Lecture 5 of Introduction to Computational Literary Analysis. Today we're going to work with files. Okay, here we go. Let's say I want to get a copy of the Moonstone in plain text. There are lots of places to find plain text files, but I've put some of these files on the course repository already. So if you were to click this link to go to the course repository, click the Readings submodule, and go into the Content folder and the Text folder, you'll see these three Markdown files. These are plain text files that you can download directly from GitHub. So this is going to take a long time to display because it's a 1 megabyte plain text file. But you can see GitLab gives us a few options of things to do with these files. We can open the raw version of it, we can download it. So I can download a copy to my computer, and here you might be given the option on your system to download it to a particular folder, you might not. But I'm going to download it to my notes folder here. So then that way, that's what JupyterLab sees when I open up JupyterLab. You can also do this another way. You can choose Open Raw, and this will give you the raw version of the plain text file without any formatting or anything here. And you can either right-click on this and choose Save Page, or you can load it directly to Jupyter using this link. All right, so now that I've done that, I'm going to open a JupyterLab notebook. And I'm going to make a new notebook here. And I'm going to call it Working with Files. I'm also going to change the name of this notebook to 04 Files. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so there are a few ways that we can get files, bring them into scope in JupyterLab and work with them. So first way is to work with files on your computer. So if you've downloaded a file already, and you can see I have, these are all of the notebooks in my current working directory, and here I've downloaded moonstone.md to this directory. So if you know where a file is, it's a good idea to put it in the directory JupyterLab knows it to be in. So how do we figure out what directory we're working in currently? We can type $pwd, which is a Jupyter magic command, run that, and it tells us we're in this series of directories, this absolute path. So this says that in the very root of my system, I have a folder called Home. Inside that, I have a folder called John. Inside that, I have a folder called Code. Inside that, I have a folder called Course Computational Literary Analysis. And finally, a folder called Notes with a capital N. So this will be, of course, different on your system. And in particular, it's different according to operating system. So Windows computers tend to have paths that start with C:\\, and instead of slashes, you probably have backslashes. Mac OS tends to be a little bit more like Linux, so yours might look a little bit like this. Mac OS paths tend to look something like /users, /volumes, etc. So this tells me what directory I'm in. If I want to figure out what files I have in this directory, I can use %ls, and that just gives me a list of all of the files that it can see. So getting started, strings, for loops, etc., and moonstone.md, which is the file we want. Okay, so if I can see that I have a file in my current present working directory, I can open it using the open command. Open moonstone.md. I can read the open file and I can assign it to some variable. I can call it moonstone, for example. And again, the inspector can come to our help here. I can press Control-I. I can move this down. And if I put my mouse over Moonstone, it can give me like a little peek into what this is. Here we have the end of the book. Here we have the beginning. It tells me it's a string. So that's great. So we've loaded this file into a string, and we're calling it Moonstone. Another way of doing this is we could load it directly from the internet. That's another possibility. We could say if we have a URL, so let's say that we're back here and I copy the URL of this plain text file from GitHub, I can come over here and I can get the requests library, which allows us to download things from the internet, and I can use requests get method providing this URL, and I can save that to something called response maybe, and then if that works correctly, I can get the text from that response and assign it to some other variable. You know, maybe I could call it Moonstone 2. And if we were to look at Moonstone 2, yeah, you can see we have basically the same thing. We've just downloaded it from the internet instead. If I run one of these commands, it's going to take a really long time to run because it's printing out the entire text of the novel. This is usually what we don't want, since this can really slow down everything. And so what we normally want to do if we want to inspect a really large string is to just only peek at the first few hundred characters or so. You know, so if I look at the first 400 characters of the Moonstone, it shows me a small portion of this. So that's a lot more manageable. You'll notice here that you, instead of having these line breaks, you have a \n, which is how Python sees a line break. And this is really useful because you can imagine we can split on \n as the separator, and then we can get a list of these lines. So if we just remember \n is a line break. You might also see \r, and that's a carriage return, and this is most often seen in Windows. Okay, so what if we want to print it out so it doesn't look quite so messy? We can use the print function on Moonstone's first 400 characters, and that will show us the version that we're more used to seeing. So all this does is, instead of printing out literally \n, it shows it to us as a line break. All right, so why don't we explore this text file a little bit? So we've opened it from either from our computer or from the internet. And now you'll notice that in Markdown, you use these # characters to show the heading of something. You know, so if something is a first level heading, you know, it will just have one of these. If something is a second level heading, it will have two, and if something is a third level heading, it will have three. So you know this just from messing around with Markdown in Jupyter Lab. But what that means is, what we can do is we can do this little trick where we can say, let's take the moonstone and let's split it on a double pound sign. And let's assign this to something called moonstone parts, let's say. Okay, now let's look at the contents of moonstone parts. Let's look at the first one. You see, this is everything before that first prologue, it looks like. And in fact, let's print this out to get a better view of it. Why don't we look at the number 1 version? Okay, yeah, that's the beginning of the prologue. This is prologue chapter 2. This is prologue chapter 3. It's prologue chapter 4. And that's the beginning of the first period. Okay, great. So what if we want to get just the prologue and just mess around with the prologue a little bit? I could say moonstone prologue parts is moonstone parts, let's say from 1 to 5. So that's going to be up until but not including number 5. So let's see if that works. Moonstone prologue parts. The first one is the beginning of the prologue. Great. Second one, number 1. And let's look at the last one, using -1 for the last one. Great. Yeah, so what we have here in Moonstone prologue parts is, as you can see, it's a list. It's a list of length 4, so we have 4 parts, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. And because it's a list, we would write a for loop to do something with each part of the list. So first, I'll show you what this looks like. If I were to just take first part, here you can see it's just the text of chapter 2. So I could do anything I wanted to with this because this is a string. So I could say, I could call this part 2. And now if we look at part 2, it says that it's a string here, so we can use string methods on it. So we could do something like split, and we're not going to give it a separator, so it should separate according to any white space. So any space at all, it's going to split it. All right. So, yeah, one thing that we could do is we could also count the number of times we see something like diamond. That happens only once in this lowercase form. What about uppercase form? Diamond is 5. So that's kind of neat. What if we were to lowercase this first and then count how many times we see diamond lowercase? So that's 6. 6 times in this part we see diamond. So we have this operation which lowercases string, and it counts the number of times you see diamond in that string. So already that's kind of useful. But what if I want to do this on each part in all of these Moonstone prologue parts? Well, I can write a for loop again that goes through each one of these parts sequentially and then does this operation. So I could say for part, I could say for chapter in Moonstone prologue parts, print out that chapter's lowercase version's count of a word like diamond. Okay, so what this should do is it should go through every section in the Moonstone prologue, section by section, and for each section it should print out the count of diamond in each of those sections. So 0 in the very first, 6 in the second, 2 in the one after that, and 3 in the one after that. So yeah, you can already tell how this can give us an idea of the distribution of some words. So try this out on your own and put in a few words. This is only going to work if it's lowercase. Put in a few words and just see how those words are distributed around the prologue. Yeah, what if I put in India? So, yeah, this is just a very, very rudimentary text analysis that we're doing here. And we're taking advantage of Markdown formatting to break this up into parts like this. Okay, now there are a few gotchas here, and by gotcha I mean there are a few things that could go wrong, and I want to show you how to avoid those or how to deal with them. So the first is sometimes you know you have a file and you know it's here in your present working directory, but you're getting some kind of error as you open it. And this could have something to do with file encoding. It could also have something to do with handling of new lines between operating systems. If you want, you can read the documentation here for the open function. And I've pressed Shift Tab to get this here, but I can also look at it down in the contextual help here. It says I can pass a few different parameters to this function to allow it to read things easier. So one thing is I could say, why don't we try setting the encoding if I'm getting an error. I could say, what if I try setting the encoding to something else? Now let me see what my options are. One option I think is UTF-8. Could be with a dash here, it could not, but this is one way to get around any problem that you might have with encoding, because some operating systems, say like Mac OS or Windows, they don't properly adjust for the potential encoding coming in. Another way of getting around any errors that you might have while opening things is by saying, you know what we're going to do with errors? We're going to ignore them. And I think it tells us here, yeah, it says pass ignore to ignore errors. All right, so if we were to do all of this, then we would have an even better chance of opening a file that was giving us trouble. So I'm going to annotate that by saying, if you have any open errors, try opening a file as UTF-8 or ignoring errors. Actually, and I forgot that for every open file we actually have to read it. Good practice is to do something like this. You may have also seen a form that looks like this. You could say with open moonstone.md as file, moonstone file dot read, and then we could assign this to something like moonstone. So the only difference here is that this form, it automatically does this thing where it closes a file. Closing a file is sometimes pretty useful because if you have too many files open, your file system might not like it. And so if you're dealing with lots and lots of files at a time, it's usually a good idea to close it after you're done reading it. So this is an alternative way of writing that's probably best practice. I tend to do this a whole lot, and I'm going to show you open and .read a ton, only because that's what I'm used to. But I can annotate this by saying like best practices way of opening a file is usually something more like this. Okay, what are other gotchas? If you get a file not found error, again, make sure that you're in the right directory. Make sure that the file that you're trying to access is in that directory. What are other things that could happen here? Yeah, so there are a few other things that could go wrong. One is you are not in the right directory. One is you didn't open the correct file. So if you have something called moonstone.md, but actually you did something in a previous Python notebook and that file is blank, this kind of thing happens all the time. You are not going to get the results that you want. So again, I think it's really a great idea to every step of the way make sure that you know what kind of file you're dealing with, make sure that you know the contents of the variables that you're manipulating, and make sure that everything is the right length, everything makes sense. One thing that I like to do is run the len command on everything. So if I run the len command on Moonstone, it tells me that Moonstone is 1,072,903 characters long. If I were to run len on, say, like the first of these Moonstone prologue parts, it tells me that it's about 1,000 characters long. Here's something neat. So you can take one of these Moonstone prologue parts and you can split it on white space, and then you can take the length of that and you can basically get it word count. It's more or less 182 words. So next time we're going to be talking about what word counts really mean and the difference between like a word and a token and a type and everything. But this is just like a quick and dirty way of getting the word count for something. So if I wanted to, I could do that with all of the parts too. I could say for Moonstone part in Moonstone prologue parts, and there I'm just pressing tab to save me a little bit of typing. I could print the length of that Moonstone part, and it tells me that the first one is 1,000 characters, second one is 4,000 characters. What if I were to split it first? This will tell me the words for each one. It tells me first one is about 182 words. The second is about 735 words. So this might be kind of useful if you're trying to calculate something like you want to know not just how many times the word diamond appears, but how many times it appears proportionally compared with the number of words in a part. So I could say moonstone part count diamond, but let me do this on a lowercase version of it. So I could say words in part is the length of that moonstone part split. And I could call this words that are diamond. And this is a count of the lowercase versions of the instances of diamond. And then I could print words that are diamond divided by the number of words in that part. And this is going to show me the number of times diamonds appears, but adjusted for or divided by the total number of words in that part. Oh, I spelled it wrong. Yeah, so kind of almost predictably it happens the most in that end section there, but not by very much. So already we're doing interesting word counting stuff, and we haven't even gotten into breaking things up into words properly yet. This will be kind of tricky to get the hang of at first because it's going to be so different for everyone on different operating systems. So, if you run PWD on Windows, for example, you're going to get a very different looking path. It's just always good to keep checking in with your computer to see where files are. You might be more comfortable using a file browser, for example. So if I'm here in my file browser and I open up my code directory and my course Computational Literary Analysis directory, and if I open up my notes directory, here I can see just a list of all of the files that I have there. And if I've downloaded something elsewhere, I might want to copy and paste it over here, or I might want to just drag and drop it over here. And for each of these files, if I were to right-click on this and get the properties of that file, it will often tell me this is Linux, but something similar will happen in your operating system. It will often tell me the complete path to something. And then what I could do is I could copy that path and bring it over here and copy that file into my present working directory. All right, so this is a short one, and I didn't cover a lot of stuff here, but it's really important to practice along with this notebook at home. You might not be able to run each of these notebook cells if you download this perfectly on your own computer, so you may have to adjust it a little bit for your operating system. But yeah, let us know in Zulip how this works for you, because getting started with this is the one thing that is going to enable us to start working with the text that we've been reading in this course. All right, great. Looking forward to talking to you more about this momentarily.